Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Why did God choose this? Hey everybody, Joe Simons, like diamonds, back again with Salt Strong Unchurched. This could be the most important, impactful episode I've done ever, maybe. And I'll tell you why. I just finished reading this book called Breathe. And it's rare that I will say, like, man, this is one of the best books and most eye-opening books I've ever read. I didn't even get excited about reading it. But I had two different people in a really short time frame had told me about this book called Breathe. And they're like, you have to read it, like from all the anxiety stuff and just all these facts about getting rid of snoring, getting rid of sleep apnea, asthma, things that have been very prevalent in my family in particular. And even with my kids, you know, little asthma stuff and snoring and a lot of little breathing problems. And this book goes into depth on how you can alleviate and sometimes even get rid of all those problems, including asthma, anxiety, which we've talked about the importance of breathing there. But the sleep apnea and the snoring and even, just preventative on cancer. It's not going to obviously cure cancer. But I mean, just one of the most fascinating books I've ever read. So why did God choose this? What I'm talking about is if you go back to Genesis, so we're going to do a little bit of a Bible study here. And I'm just going to read, the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. And interesting that God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And that's really one of the main parts of this book is that the majority of Americans are breathing the completely wrong way. And it goes into fine detail on what this is doing to our bodies. And what I mean by that is most of us spend a lot of time breathing through our mouths, right? And a lot of snoring at nighttime is breathing through the mouth. When I was going through my worst anxiety, most people that have panic attacks, they're over breathing through their mouth. And this whole book is essentially talking about nose breathing. And it's a reason why mouth tape and all this stuff, which I honestly kind of thought was silly, why it's becoming popular. And it's because there's real science and real doctors behind a lot of this. Just absolutely fascinating. So here's kind of how this book got started. This guy, James Nestor, had chronic breathing issues from really bad sleep apnea, where if you know what that is, and if you suffer from it, you've got to read this book. But it's essentially where you're waking up kind of choking on your own breath, if you will, sometimes every few minutes if you have it really bad, where, I mean, almost impossible to get a good night rest if you have bad sleep apnea. And then snoring is obviously a part of that, and asthma and just a lot of other little breathing issues, sinus infections, all that stuff comes. And it turns out he was doing a ton of mouth breathing. Like he was spending at least half of his day, if not more, breathing in through the mouth instead of in through the nose, the same way God created all of us. And so he went on this 10-year journey to find out everything he could about breathing. And one of the craziest things, kind of how the book started off, was all of these sleeping problems, sleep apnea and snoring, go or fall into the whole breath category. And the more he was digging deeper, he's like, for the last essentially 800 or so years, all of these things have started happening. And really it's the last 500 years, but the last 800 years has been this gradual increase of all this stuff, sleep apnea, asthma, ADHD, all of these things were not around, a couple thousand years ago. Isn't that wild? And he went back to Paris and where they have buried millions literally of bodies underneath the city when they ran out of room during all the different pandemics and stuff over the thousands of years. And what he's found is interesting is every single skull he can find, and this has been confirmed many, many times over, but all the skulls of people, let's just say 1,000 years or older, they all have, for the most part, perfect teeth, meaning there was no orthodontics, there was no dentist back then, yet they all had perfect teeth. They all had much more defined bone structure. They had way bigger nostrils. They were all breathing through their nose. That's just what they did. And of course, they were chewing more, right? I mean, they had more defined mouths. We didn't have all this processed food. So they were chewing more, meaning, isn't that crazy? The asthma, sleep apnea, snoring, bad teeth, crooked teeth, having to get teeth pulled, all of that stuff has happened in the last really 500 or 600 years once we started, bringing processed food into our lives. Really, the last couple 100 years. But once again, it's been a little bit of a gradual, decline or increase in processed food, decline in our breathing. And a lot of that has made that shift from us breathing through our nose, which was what everyone did thousands of years. It would have been impossible to find someone who was a mouth breather, thousands of years ago. And now, because our mouths have essentially shrunken and become less powerful due to the fact that we're not chewing, this has had this massive, multi-100-year, decrease in our ability to breathe the right way. I mean, absolutely nuts. So let me just tell you what he did. One of the first things that he did to just to prove the point, and I can't imagine doing this. So he went 10 days with his nostrils completely closed. So 10 days of nothing but mouth breathing. And that's kind of how he kicks off his story. And it's fascinating. So 10 days where he can only breathe through his mouth. And in that 10 days, everything about his health, from blood pressure skyrocketed, cholesterol went up, his sleep apnea was at all-time highs. He was snoring like crazy. He felt like he was dying. He says, I was so depressed. It was absolutely miserable by blocking off his nose for 10 days straight. And then he had to do the same thing every day for this full 20 days, meaning he had to eat the same meals, the exact same meals at the exact same time. He had to exercise the exact same bike route. That everything had to be the same to make sure this was going to be correct. And another guy did it with him as well, had the exact same results. Started forming a sinus infection because he wasn't using his nose, because he was breathing only through his mouth. Like, all these things happened in a 10-day period of time, guys. Nuts. So after the 10 days, and they test him, they did the blood work and chest oxygen levels, all that stuff for 10 days. And it was horribly bad. And then the next 10 days, they did the opposite, where he was now only supposed to be breathing through his nose. And all of those issues that happened the first 10 days went away pretty much within 24, 48 hours. So all of a sudden, he says, I felt like I got my life back. He's like, everything got better. Blood pressure went down. All this stuff got better. He's like, I was able to ride the bike so much farther. And what was interesting, though, he said the first time in his life, his sleep apnea went away. And his snoring went from normally, I think it was like 4 hours of night, and they had cameras in his room and all that to monitor everything. He went from, a legitimate 4 full hours of snoring a night. How miserable is that if you're sleeping next to that person? To 4 minutes, all because of just 10 days of breathing through the nose. And I will tell you, I have been, because obviously no one knows when they're snoring, but I have been told by my wife that I snore. And over the last couple of weeks of me practicing this myself, of me practicing the nose breathing and opening up my nose more, my snoring is almost zero. Like, she's just like, did you do something different? And I told her about it, and she's like, well, keep doing that. Like, it's amazing. She goes, that's the best sleep I've ever had, because I'm not having to kick you about snoring. So I can tell you, as a personal experience, just for me doing this breathing through my nose, it has had a massive, massive impact in my energy levels, and my wife being happier with me as well. I don't snore every single night, but when I do, it's usually bad, and it's always through my mouth, and just absolutely, absolutely nuts. And what's interesting, I went back and really thought through my anxiety attacks when I was really, at the worst. And all of that was from over breathing, and meaning I was always breathing through my mouth, like, and I mean, it's wild. And obviously I've talked about this multiple times, so I'm not going to belabor it, but the importance of breathing through the nose, which is what I talked about in that anxiety video and on the podcast before, and then out through the mouth, is critical. And most people who start over breathing like that, especially through their mouth, they cause so much damage, and it just makes an anxiety attack worse. And in fact, there's a study on in this book, kind of I mean, not humane, but it was done a long time ago, where they took both monkeys and dogs and plugged up their nostrils and just made them breathe through the mouth. And almost all of the monkeys that did this for an extended amount of time died in a really short amount of time. They it was crazy, all the things that happened to them. Like they couldn't run away from prey, they couldn't eat, like their lives just basically just went down the tube in a really short amount of time. And got some crazy guy did this with dogs as well. Like I said, anyone who loves animals hates to hear that, but these are all studies done a long, long time ago in other countries. And I did the same thing with dogs, clogged up their nostrils on purpose to monitor it. And made the dogs do some exercise and stuff. Many of the dogs died, and the cause of death was essentially overbreathing. They literally just were breathing too much the completely wrong way. So that is the power of breathing through your nose and not your mouth. I mean, isn't that crazy? And it turns out there is a perfect breath, if you're wondering. And it's 5.5 seconds in through the nose and then 5.5 seconds out through the mouth, which is about 5.5 breaths per minute. And this book goes on to say that most people, like the vast majority of people, are not doing that. Most people do anywhere from 10 to 20 breaths per minute. So that's the average American is doing 10 to 20 breaths. And this is saying the perfect breath in terms of getting everything your body needs for there's two things. Oxygen and carbon dioxide is 5.5 breaths per minute, which is 5.5 seconds into the nose and then 5.5 out through the mouth. You become calmer. It actually has a couple of things. I don't know if I believe this because it hasn't worked for me yet, but there's even some studies where people lost some weight doing this, where the perfect breath just helps out everything. And even once again, it can't cure cancer. And this book never says anything about that, but in terms of preventative and some of the old school breathers, the monks and the yogis and stuff that have done this. I mean, it was wild how many of them have lived to 100 and have kept their body free of cancer. And a lot of them claim, in terms of the study that they did, that they had just the perfect breath that was full of oxygen. And obviously, when there's a lot of oxygen, cancer can't really live as well. And when there's not, cancer, just like anything, like the guy's sinus infection started flaring up in the first 10 days of him not getting the right breath. I mean, really, really fascinating. I'm not a doctor, obviously, and I'm probably doing a horrible job at explaining this, but I had to go back and read so many things in this book because it was shocking. I mean, including some of the cancer stuff that they had talked about. I'll go read it because I know I highlighted that page. Yeah, and this explains why cancer develops and thrives in environments with low oxygen. In some of these breathers, I mean, you've probably heard of what's his name, the Iceman. I'm blanking on his name, but he's the guy that he did the marathon in the snow with Wim Hof. Yeah, so I'm thinking about. I mean, he's broken now. I don't know how many different world records of things that he's done in the ice, which is why they call him the Iceman. And then he'll tell you it's all through breathing, where he can heat his body up an extra 10 degrees when he needs to. Like if he's literally in the ice for that long. I mean, he stays in these ice baths for an hour and a half at a 40-degree temperature and comes out and there's nothing wrong with his body. I mean, it doesn't make sense, right? But he just talks about how he's learned how to breathe, and he's not doing the 5.5 breaths per second. He's doing something completely different to warm his body up. But just absolutely so fascinating. There's another story in here, and this is all true story, and it was from the Olympics. There was this guy who ended up becoming the breathing coach for the Yale track team, and the Yale track team beat everyone in the country by a long shot with this breathing technique, basically opening up their airways to give them a whole lot more energy, if you will, and strength. And ended up going on to teach the 1968 U.S. Olympic team. So this is the guy's name is Stahl, Stough is his last name. So this is Dr. Stahl. And so he trained the 1968 U.S. men's team. They went on to win a total of 12 Olympic medals. Most were gold, and set 5 world records. To date, it is one of the greatest performances in any Olympics. And the Americans were the only runners not to use oxygen before or after the race, which was unheard of at the time. And that was the power of harnessing what Stowe called his full exhalation. So it's a lot of breathing. They literally spent just as much time breathing as they did running around the track. Nuts. I mean, this is all documented in the 1968 U.S. Men's Olympics, and this is the track team. 12 medals, mostly gold, and set 5 world records. And they were the only team at the Olympics not to use oxygen before or after the race. And here's the really, really big one that I highlighted and dog-eared, et cetera. And there was quite a few studies on people who have essentially reversed some of their aging through breathing. And I know I told my wife who's a doctor, and she's like, that's not true. And then she read it. She's like, wow, that's pretty interesting. And these are all documented things. And even documentation of this guy, this author who got scans of x-ray scans and CAT scans of his body and some of the changes that happened during this 10-year period of time of his nostrils opening up and even some of his bone density. And then we're talking about centimeters here, but actually changing in his mouth in a good way to open up the airways. And it was believed that, once you hit past 30 years old, you can't change that kind of stuff. And he was one of the first people to prove on x-rays, unbiased doctors, that you actually could change for the better as you get older. And this guy's, I'm guessing 45, 50 years old. But here's the interesting thing for some of these researches that he found. It was discovered that the greatest indicator of lifespan wasn't genetics, diet, or the amount of daily exercise, as many had suspected for so many years. Instead, it was lung capacity. The smaller and less efficient lungs became, the quicker the subjects got sick and died. The cause of deterioration didn't matter. Smaller meant shorter, but larger lungs equaled longer lives. The ability to breathe full breaths, according to these researchers, appeared to be literally a measure of living capacity. And in 2000, that was an older, that was a 1980 research. In 2000, University of Buffalo researchers and doctors did a similar study, compared the lung capacity in a group of more than 1,000 subjects over 3 decades. The results were exactly the same. Larger lungs equaled longer lives. And the larger lungs happen from the correct way of breathing through the nose and then out through the mouth. 5.5 seconds in, 5.5 seconds out. Also interesting that many of the old prayers, regardless of your religion, obviously I'm talking a little bit more about Christianity here, but Christianity, Jesus did this. I mean, a lot of the old prayers were purposely 5.5 to 6 seconds before you would take your next breath, meaning the verse, if you will, that they were normally singing or chanting was right at that 5.5 seconds to 6 before you would have to take a breath. Pretty fascinating, right? Anyhow, I just wanted to share that with you, especially even if you only take away trying to breathe through the nose a little bit slower, right? The irony is, I think we all believe, oh, we got to get more breaths. It's like deep breathing. And he's like, no, deep breathing is not good. It's not bad. Like you could do that if you're training for the Olympics and really trying to do something different. But in general, if you're just trying to be healthier and to get rid of snoring and sleep apnea and some of the things and asthma in your life and anxiety, try just doing 5.5 seconds in through the nose and then 5.5 seconds out through the mouth. It takes a little while to get used to. I'll be honest, when I first started doing it, I felt like I was struggling for air. Like I was like out of breath. Now it seems easier, a little bit tougher when I'm talking for 20 plus minutes on a podcast and I get all excited talking about this stuff. But in general, if I just sit here, if I'm reading a book or out, or even, doing the treadmill or something, I'm now practicing that breath, and it's just become easier and easier every day. And once again, I can say I can't say anything else about, I haven't taken any blood test or blood work, but I will say, my wife will agree, my snoring has almost gone away, like eliminated, just from doing this breathing technique. So that is my challenge to you. 5.5 seconds in through the nose, 5.5 seconds out through the mouth. And then get this book. I highly recommend it. I only covered just a small fraction of the things in here. I could probably do a 2-hour podcast on this, and the stories in here. And there's some really advanced stuff about some of the monks who have found ways to use breathing to heat their bodies, where they can literally sit in the snow and basically melt the ice. Their body can get that warm all through breathing, like this guy Wim Hof. I mean, crazy stuff. I don't need that in my life personally. I just want to I want to get rid of the snoring. I want to sleep better. I want my wife to be more excited to sleep next to me. That alone is awesome. And even for our kids, I was watching Jackson, who's having a little bit of breathing problems, and wild, guess what? He's breathing a lot through his mouth. He's like, oh, my nose is clogged. And they said one of the main reasons the nose is clogged is you don't use them enough. And the best way to do it is to start practicing using it. And even as this guy showed, I mean, just 10 days of clogging up his nose, it got completely clogged. He had to get a doctor to remove all the crap out of that just after 10 days of not breathing through the nose. Already was forming a sinus infection. All that stuff happened in a 10-day period of time. And once again, maybe there's a reason that God breathes into his nostrils the breath of life, not anywhere else. So hope this was a good one for you guys. Like I said, I got just incredibly excited about this. It's called Breath. It's a yellow book. James Nestor, The New Science of a Lost Art. And it's a New York Times bestseller. It's kind of gone viral, I think, just because of, this guy went through he didn't just study it. He went through all this stuff himself and his own search for better breathing, because he was miserable and couldn't even sleep at night. So check it out. Otherwise, I will talk to you guys in the next episode. And if you have any cool stories or anything you want to share about breathing, let me know. Joe@saltstrong.com.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul. It was passed down to me from the days of old. To find us on the water, if there was a way. It's been said my papa, he wrote the book on catching big reds and 20-pound snook. I wish I knew all the things he knew today. For he's the reason why we are this way. And he put fishing in our soul.